Hi, this is Simon Obstall and welcome to another tutorial for Apple Motion. And today we're going to be taking a look at recreating the effect from Adobe Photoshop called Blend If, in which the grayscale values of one image determine how much we see of the other. And you can see how this works here. So this is what we're going to be recreating in Motion. And as a bonus, we'll be also turning it into an effect template for Final Cut. So let's dive in and take a look. So as I say, we're going to be building this as a Final Cut effect template, but I'm going to start off by actually creating just a simple motion composition. So given that this is a static effect, there is no animation in it, but in the interests of full disclosure, I'm using 1920 1080 frame rate 24 frames a second and a duration of 4 seconds. So I've got my two images in here. I've got these eyes and the river shot. So as I mentioned, what this effect does is it uses the grayscale values of one image to mask the other image and composite the two together. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this river shot as a starting point and we're going to right click and we're going to make clone layer. And I'm going to drag it out into a new group. And indeed, I'm going to drag the eyes out into their own group as well. So each of those is now in its own group. So what I'm going to do is with this clone layer, I'm going to come to Filters and Color, and I'm going to select Channel Mixer. Now, we're going to just use the average of the three channels as a starting point. So I'm going to turn on the monochrome switch, and we'll set these values here to be 0.33 for red, green and blue. So that's basically just the average of the three channels. We could simply use the red or simply use the blue or indeed any combination of those. Or we could get really fancy and use the sort of luminance coefficients for these numbers. But I don't think that's really particularly necessary here. But I'll show you what the luminance coefficients are at the end if you're interested. So anyway, what we're also going to do to apply to this is filters, color and levels. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take this clone and we're going to make a clone of it. So right click, make clone layer, and I'm going to drag it into the group with the eyes like that. And I'm going to set its blend mode to multiply. So we can turn off this group with the mask in it. And you can already see more or less how this is working. We're also going to take this clone that we've made and we've dropped it into there, the one with a multiply on it, and we're going to duplicate it, and then we're going to move that into the group with the river in it, above the river, like so. And then this group with the eyes in it, we're going to set its blend mode to add. And the final step is to take this clone layer here, the one in the river group, and come to Filters and Color and Negative, because we want to invert it. And now this is what it looks like. And so we can use this levels control to create our blend if operation. And we're all set up and you can see how nicely this is working. So depending on how we adjust these levels, we get more of one image and less of the other. So I've just renamed these groups to make it easier to understand what's going on. So this top layer here contains the mask. So that's the clone of the river image with the channel mixer and the levels on it. Then we've got the upper layer, which is the eyes, and then the lower layer, which is the river. And both of those have been multiplied by the cloned mask. So let's just have a look at them individually, and it's easier to see what's happened. So multiplying the river by the inverted mask means that all the bright areas of this image are being suppressed and the darker areas are coming through more. And if we look at the other image, you'll see that the dark areas of the river image are being suppressed in this case. And in the bright areas of the river image, which is obviously the sky, we're seeing through to this layer, which is the eyes. And when we add those two together, what we get is a perfect composite where the pixel values of each image are being retained, because what we're suppressing in one image is being allowed through in the other image and vice versa. So let's now talk about converting this into a Final Cut effect template. So what we're first of all going to do is come over to File and Convert Project to Effect. And this brings up this dialog which asks us which layer we want to use as the effect source. And in this case, we want it to be the bottommost layer, and it's that river image. So let's select that one and press Convert. And you'll see that's changed this from an ordinary layer into an effect source. The other thing we need to do is we need to come into this upper layer and we need to add a drop zone. So we're going to come over to Object and New Drop Zone and drop that into there. And let's just turn off this eyes layer because that's going to be the top layer here. So what are we going to actually publish? Well, we obviously need to publish the levels control. So let's just first of all reset that. And let's open up the histogram, open up the RGB, and the two that we need to control are this one, the black in, so let's publish that, and the white in, this one here, so let's also publish that, and maybe let's also just publish the gamma for extra value. And I think another thing that might be useful to do is to publish these channel mixer controls, so we can have different input channels for the mask. So what I'm going to do is actually create a new rig. So I'll select the red and add to a new rig, and I'm going to select pop-up. And let's come back to the channel mixer. Let's command click on the green and blue and just drag them over that pop-up as well. So they're all three of them are there. So this first snapshot I'm going to call average because that's what we've got. We've got 0.33 of each of them. Let's come to snapshot 2, rename that as red. We need to open this up just to make sure we're using the right controls here. So we'll have 0 for the green and blue and 1 for the red. And then we'll come to the next snapshot. We'll rename this as green. And we'll have 0 for the blue, 1 for the green, 0 for the red. We'll add a new snapshot and call it blue. Have 1 for the blue and 0 for the green. And I did mention that we could also use luminance. So let's actually set that up. Let's add a new snapshot and call this luminance. And for this, we need some very specific values as follows. Let's start with the red. And what we want here is 0.2126. So that's 2126. Let's come to the green. And what we want here is 0.7152. 0.7152. And finally to the blue, and let's have 0.0722, 0.0722. And these are the luminance coefficients for Rec 709. So this is, strictly speaking, luminance. So let's maybe just come back over to average and let's publish this pop-up. So publish that pop-up. Let's come over to the project. We don't want that to be called pop-up. Let's call it mask mode instead. And let's just tidy these up by simply calling that black, I think. And this one white. We don't need complicated labels. And this one as gamma. And now if we choose save, we can save this as a template. So I'm going to call this blend if and publish. So here we are in Final Cut and we've got our two images. Let's just mute that so you can see the river is underneath. And from the effects browser, I'm going to grab my newly created blend if effect and I'm going to apply it to the bottom layer. And in the drop zone, I'm going to select the top layer and apply clip. And we just need to mute that top layer. And now you can see we've got our effect here. Let's select the bottom layer so we can use the controls, and you'll see that we can now create our effect like this. And we can flick through the different channels and just see what difference they make. It's not a huge amount, but you know, depending on the color component of your image, that might be quite a useful option. And there's just one final thing that I'd like to show you, and that's how to swap the two different sources, because depending on the layer order, you get a very different effect. So what we're going to do is a little bit complicated. First of all, we're going to add this clone layer effect source to a rig. So add to rig, we can use the existing rig and we can add to new checkbox. And let's call that swap source. So a little bit complicated here. What I'm going to do, just so we can see exactly how what's happening, is I'm going to just temporarily select the eyes as the source for this drop zone. So we can do that from here, just grabbing that image like that. And we can always just clear it later on by selecting drop zone. But this allows you to see what I'm actually doing. So what we'll actually need to do here is to be able to use this swap source as a way of swapping the source for the mask. So I'm going to click on the swap source button there, and into this image well, I'm going to drag the drop zone like that. And then you'll see that as I switch, that changes that mask image. So let's stick with this one for the time being as we set this up. So the other thing we need to affect is this negative filter. Because when we swap the sources, we don't want to be inverting this one, we want to be inverting this clone here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this negative filter onto this clone here. Not the drop zone, but onto the clone, like that. So we've got two versions of it. And then I'm going to take the first one and I'm going to grab that mix value and I'm going to drag it onto that swap source there. And I'm going to take this other one and again drag the mix value onto the swap source. And you can see there now both of them in there. So it's a little bit confusing here, but just remember that the original negative is the one for our original state, and this negative copy is the one for the new state. So for this state of the swap source, where we're using the upper layer, in this case the eyes, as the mask source, we need to set this original negative mix value down to 0. And then if we toggle this off, we need to set the other mix value down to 0, like so. And then we also need to publish this swap source button like that, and you'll see it pops up here. So you can see how that changes, and then we can just adjust the levels values, and we get a very different result from using the other image as the mask source. So that's just quite a useful little additional feature, I think. Just to remember to reset the drop zone before you save it. So there you go, that's Blend If. If you want to know more about the science behind this, I did a tutorial for Blackmagic Fusion that went into the numbers behind it all. But hope you'll find this quite a useful effect. So thanks very much indeed for watching. Hope to see you again soon.